Up, everybody? Welcome to the stream. Hope you're doing well. I'm gonna pull up a couple other windows here just so I can kind of pay attention to what's going on here on my side. Hope everybody's doing good. What do you got going on for the week? Got any job applications? Anything I can help out with? Feel free to drop some stuff in chat. Always happy to help out. So I'm gonna do another Q&A session. I got a handful of questions that I want to get through. And these are going to touch on a fair amount of behavioral kinds of questions. So, for those that have been paying attention on YouTube, I've actually built out some YouTube channels for the stream. They're not channels, playlists. So, I've got a playlist for technical questions, one for behavioral questions, one for just general, and then one that's like interview prep, like actually going through the application sort of phase. And what I've done is I've gone through the other Q&A videos that I've made and I've kind of like chopped them up into smaller pieces and I'm gradually adding them to all the playlists. What I was hoping was that on YouTube it would like send out those notifications every other day going, "Hey, Ian published a new video." Um, but I don't know that it's actually sending out those notifications. So let me know if you're subscribed on YouTube and let me know whether you see those notifications from YouTube. That would be a big help for me because I don't see those notifications. Even though I'm trying to subscribe to my channel from a different Gmail account of mine, I'm not getting those notices on my phone saying that a new video was published. And that might be because the primary Google account on my phone is the same one that I use to actually publish the videos and whatever. So anyway, but let me know if you're getting those notices like that a new video got published. I would love to kind of get some feedback on that. Otherwise, I think instead of just sort of time delaying them every other day, um, I'll probably just release all of them just so they're out there. But yeah, I had three longer Q&A sessions and I broke them up into, I don't know, something like 45 different videos, something like that. There were quite a few. And so hopefully those playlists will help out. But let me know. Go ahead and like and subscribe on YouTube, all that stuff. Um, and you'll get notified when I add more videos. So tonight's video, I'll get the full video up as usual. But I actually went through and I wrote some software that basically splits a video. So I can just kind of go back and as I review it, I can put little timestamp markers in a text file and then I run a little Python script, and it basically goes through and it chops up the video on those start and end time markers, and makes the thumbnail image for me, the whole bit. So it was pretty fun. It took a little while to write while I was juggling other stuff, and the fact that I'm really still only typing with one hand most of the time. But the good news is I get to get rid of this sling hopefully this week. So we'll see how physical therapy goes on Tuesday and Thursday this week, and hopefully get rid of the sling. That would be fantastic. I've modified my desk here a little bit to be able to type a little bit more. My physical therapist has been really great about giving me some ideas on that kind of stuff and lots of good exercises to do and starting to shrug my shoulders a little bit more. So I'm getting some work on the shoulder. It's been a little sore, but it's good. It that pain means it's healing or something, right? Anyway, hope you're doing well. Hope that you're having a good week. And if you do have job stuff come up, you can always contact me. You can look at techinterview.guide and kind of see, my contact info on there. So primarily watching out on LinkedIn. So if you've got questions, that'll probably be the best place to reach out. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and just send me direct messages there. Happy to answer those privately. But also happy to take questions on chat here at any time. If you've got something that you want to discuss and you don't want it to be on chat, you're welcome to email me. It's ian.douglas@techinterview.guide. You can email me there. And I'll just say, hey, these questions came in. And from my previous sessions that I just say, hey, this person had a question. I don't say their name. I don't say their gender. I don't say anything about them, like who they are, anything like that. So please know if you submit a question to me, I'll ask it anonymously on your behalf. So I'm happy to do that. But if you are on the chat and you've got questions, feel free to drop them in chat. Aside from that, we'll get going. I got a handful of questions. We'll probably hang out for 45 minutes or so, and then we'll wrap up from there. I have reached out to a couple of people to be on the stream on Thursday. I do want to kind of get back to the Thursday night guest kind of thing, but this past Thursday I was just not in a good place with my shoulder, and That's part of the downside of doing physical therapy on the on the morning when you want to do a stream later and you're on pain medication and stuff like that. So I just need to get my ducks in a row and be better about organizing that stuff. But I'm gradually getting back to it. So let's jump into some questions here. These questions come in from all over the place. So I've got questions from LinkedIn, from Twitter, from Quora, from just emails and chats and things like that from people all over the place. So I kind of mix and match them together. And so I'll be going through a handful of those questions. Some of them may sound like repeats. And so if they're a repetitive type of question, then I probably won't address it on the stream as long as I have in the past. And I'll just say, like, we've covered that in the past, and you can go check out the YouTube playlist for that kind of question. So I'll try to direct as much as I can to things that I've answered previously. On the last 3 long Q&A sessions that I've done, I actually had the same question come up every week, which was, what are some questions I can ask? And I sincerely do want to get to a whole session where we just talk about that. So I'm trying to line up some HR people where we can talk about those kinds of things. So I want to get like maybe 1 or 2 HR people and 1 or 2 engineering managers together where we can have a conversation, a bunch of us together, and talk about like what are some questions that were like really memorable for you, that really stood out for you, that that really made a candidate kind of stand out and show that they were really prepared. When we had a chat with Lee, I think it was a week ago or so, or 2 weeks ago, Lee's whole thing was like, you got to be prepared for these interviews. You got to be like ready to go. And so it just shows really good preparation when you come up with those questions. So I've been planning that out. I've got a whole bunch of notes written up and ready to talk about. And so I'm going to aim to do that next Sunday. So next Sunday, that'll be September 12th, I believe. Well, let's get into it. Let's get into some of these questions. And yeah, if you're hanging out on chat, feel free to drop questions in chat as we go. I'll pay attention to those. And big thanks to oh, I disabled one of the things here. Let me turn those back on. There we go. Get those labels back on there. And Haas00312, thanks for the follow. I saw that you were following while the stream was kind of prepping and getting started there. So appreciate that. Which of the following topics would the algorithm be most important to know before a FANG kind of interview? Search algorithm, sorting algorithm, hashing algorithm, or dynamic programming? This is a great question. Leading into interview prep, knowing what kinds of questions you're likely to be asked by a company when it comes to technical challenges is a really good way to be prepared. My recommendation there is to use a website like Sean Prashad's website, and I've shared that URL in the past. I'll see if I can like copy it out of a browser in another window and like paste it in the chat. And I'll put it in the YouTube description later on. But Sean Prashad's website is a really, really good prep tool for like seeing the kinds of questions that companies are likely to ask. It's not a guarantee that they're going to ask you these specific LeetCode questions. Let me paste it in here in the chat. But it's a really good study tool, and I've talked about that before. And you can go back and you can check out the video that I made on shortcutting the LeetCode grind. And by looking at Sean's website, you'll see a new thing at the top. It was a recommendation that I made, or like a GitHub issue that I passed along. Said, hey, it would be really cool if someone could, add something to the site that when you pick a company, that you show kind of like a frequency of like the kinds of questions you're likely to be asked, so that you have a better idea what you should sort of maybe prioritize your study. And someone did. Someone picked it up as a bit of code that they wanted to help Sean with on his site, and Sean actually merged in the code and published it. So that was pretty cool to see that in action this week. But one thing that I wanted to point out on that site, and I'm just going to load it up here on my own so I can kind of talk about that real quick, is if you pull up Facebook on that list, you see dynamic programming is like the second most popular type of question that they'll ask. I actually did a mock interview with someone recently, and they were actually told that Facebook will not do a dynamic programming problem with them. So I don't know if they're changing their tactic, but it might be that Facebook is changing something about their interviews. So coming back to the question, which of these algorithms would be the most important to know? Search algorithm, sorting algorithm, hashing algorithm, or dynamic programming? I would say three of those things are actual like implementation, like very specific implementation, like a search algorithm, like go implement merge sort or go implement, a binary search. Where with dynamic programming, it could be, hey, you got a handful of dice that are all the same number of sides, and I want to know like how many different ways you can roll a sum of 20. That's a dynamic programming problem. But those, like when it comes to like sorting algorithms and search algorithms, there are only a couple of those. Hash algorithms, like there's really, I mean, there are a couple of different kinds of hashing, like the actual math portion of the hash algorithm. Um, but there's not a lot to study for those, I feel. And so I would say when it comes to these FANG level companies, the technical challenges that they're going to give you, the top ones, the top four that I primarily see, not just from Sean's site, but just also anecdotal evidence or anecdotal, uh, conversation with that I've had with other mock interviewers from those platforms on interviewing.io. Um, Dynamic programming, depth first search, breadth first search, and backtracking algorithms are the top four. Now some of those overlap a little bit, like a depth first search and backtracking. They're like really really similar. Whether you get into recursion for those is up to you, but those would be the top ones I think to study for pretty much any of the FANG companies. Would be depth first search, breadth first search, um, dynamic programming problems, and then backtracking problems. I've interviewed at a lot of FANG companies in the past, or companies that were later acquired by FANG companies or Amazon specifically, and they all asked some sort of traversal kind of question, like go find this thing in a binary tree, or how would you figure out like the maximum depth of a binary tree, and or find like a maximum sum in a tree of some kind. It's a lot of backtracking. So they can overlap a little bit. So it is important that you get an idea of how to study those different kinds of things. So that'd be my answer to that. What's the number one answer? Oops, let me go back to that. What is the number one answer you get from the interview question? What is your greatest weakness? This is one of those behavior questions where everybody expects to answer this question and people hate to answer this question. I think the whole like, what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses are a little bit cliche nowadays. I think it's easy to sugarcoat, and the advice that you hear from a lot of people is like never turn a weakness into a strength. Like I mean the asking this question is really really hard. I actually answer this question a lot more during reference calls than I do like asking this question in real interviews anymore. And so I would typically ask on a reference call, like, hey, we're thinking about hiring so and so. What would you say are like their biggest strengths or their biggest growth areas? And just kind of hear from the references like what they would think. Um, Whether or not they can answer those questions, whether or not they want to answer those questions, it's really up to them. But I've also done a lot of reference calls for people, and that one tends to come up a lot in reference calls too. So then I would say like the number one answer isn't necessarily like a helpful thing to know. Like, oh, like, like 60% of the people all say this one thing is their greatest weakness. When it comes to these kinds of behavior questions, they're really trying to get at like, what is your self-awareness? Like, do you even have self-awareness? Do you know that you have growth areas, or what have you identified as a growth area, or what have other people helped you identify as a growth area? How are you working on it? How are you overcoming that as a challenge? How are you not going to do it here? And I've talked about that on other streams before as well, where, for example, one problem that I had at a couple of jobs was I was always late to meetings. I would always think like, oh, well, the meeting room is literally like 10 feet that way or 30 feet that way. And so I'm just going to leave my desk like 30 seconds to spare because I just have to walk into the room. And I would get up from my desk and be like, oh, I need this and I need this. And yeah, should I take my laptop? Yeah, I guess I'll take my laptop. And oh, I should probably bring a pen and a notebook and whatever. And by the time I collect all this stuff, the meeting's already started and the door's closed, and I gotta like open the door and interrupt everything, find a seat, and it looks really unprofessional. And it kind of comes back to something else I've said on the stream, where one thing that I was really taught, like being raised, was being late is a sign of disrespect. Like you always want to be early for things. Like even showing up on time can sometimes be seen as disrespectful because, for me, the meeting is just getting started and I'm like walking in the door. You should be like in your seat, like prepared, ready to go when the meeting starts. Same thing with like Zoom calls and things like that. If you're working remote, like try to join that call a couple minutes early. If you're doing a remote interview, join a couple of minutes early if you can, so that you're there, you're ready to go, you're prepared, you have everything. So, how I would answer a question, like, what is your greatest weakness? I would say, well, this is what I've identified over the years of something that I had a problem with. And it was brought to my attention from various people that I worked with, and it's not who I wanted to be. And so I started putting timers on my calendar 5 minutes ahead of time, saying, hey, you've got a meeting, you need the following things. And so as soon as somebody would schedule a meeting, I would also schedule this 5 minute warning sort of thing of, you're going to need the following things for that meeting that you have. So that way I already knew what to sort of bring with me. And if I had a bunch of back-to-back meetings, I would, not bring like a backpack of stuff, but I would like try to bring everything that I would need for like all the back-to-back meetings. Sometimes it's a lot, but eventually I got to a point where even a lot of my note taking was digital. And so I didn't have to bring the notebook or the pen anymore unless I was like trying to sketch something out. But it would be something where like I was going into an architecture meeting and I knew I was going to have to draw something out, or somebody would be explaining something that I knew I was going to have to like draw out in my journal. And so just being really prepared for those things. So in a real interview scenario, I would want to talk about how I addressed it, or like how I identified it, how I've addressed it, and how I'm, sort of holding myself accountable going forward to not do that, because I don't want to give them the impression that, oh yeah, if you hire me and I come work for you, I'm also going to be late to all these meetings. That's not the impression that I would want to give. So, how do you know the trustworthiness of a person from a job interview? This is a tough one. Um, this kind of goes back to just interview prep and things like that. It's really hard to know sometimes whether somebody's really telling the truth. We can ask questions in different ways, to try to see whether the answers are consistent. There are some personality tests that you can do and like little psychology tricks that you can do with people, to kind of see if you ask a similar kind of question a little bit later, but you like change some of the wording, like do you still get a consistent kind of answer, or is it a completely different answer? Those would be things to really watch out for. But it's also really hard to design those to try to figure out, like, can I trust this person? A lot of the trustworthiness, I think, would come from a lot of reference checks and sort of background checks on people. Like, have they ever run into a problem with an employer? Has an employer, ever felt that they couldn't be trusted with something? It can be really tricky. There are companies out there, especially like public companies or companies who work with, uh, you know, public agencies or government offices and things like that, where you're going to have rules imposed upon you. Like if you're a bank, and you really want to apply for that job at that bank because they're doing something really interesting with technology, but you've got some sort of like criminal background, you're probably not going to get hired by a bank. You're probably not going to get hired by a government agency or by a company who works very closely with a government agency. It's not impossible, but there may be restrictions on who they can hire because of that background. But it also depends on the background. If you're applying for a job with a financial services company and you've got a criminal background in, financial fraud, you're probably not going to get that job. Um, but if, it was like something else, like, toilet paper at somebody's house and you got like a misdemeanor or something, probably nobody's going to blink at that. They'll be just like, all right, just don't like do that here at the job. Um, so yeah, I think ascertaining whether somebody can be trusted can be tricky. Now, you can ask some questions around, how would you handle a scenario where you found a data leak, or how would you handle a scenario where, um, some customer data got exposed that you weren't expecting, or, you know, something along those lines. Like maybe you were trying to do some debugging on a web page, and as part of that, you were putting like customer data in HTML comments or something. So it wasn't visible on the page, but if you viewed the source on the page, you could see that information or something like that. Then you would want to be really careful about that. Um, and as far as like how you answer that question, because you want to make sure that you're not giving them the impression of like, oh yeah, I've done that. That's totally on me. I've been that untrustworthy person. Um, but I think you can explain your trustworthiness to some degree as an applicant to a job. But I think a lot of that trustworthiness is going to come more from your reference calls and the kinds of work that you've done in the past. But as an interviewer, it's a hard thing to ask questions for, to where, it's not like some generic answer that everybody's going to give you. This one was kind of interesting. This question was given to me by a data scientist, and they were being invited to an interview, but it was very short notice. And they said, I've got less than 48 hours to put together a 12 to 15 minute slide deck presentation, wearing, formal wear like business attire on a technical topic, followed by, a period of Q&A for an interview. And they basically wrote and said, I've never had to do this for any other kind of job role. Like, what's up with that? Every company is a little bit different. Their expectations are going to be a little bit different. If they give you that topic and say, we want you to give us a little presentation about such and such, it's a little bit similar to like a take-home challenge. They've given you some amount of time to research a topic, put together a little slide deck thing and just give a little, 15-minute talk. It it's actually not that hard to fill up a 15-minute talk on any kind of topic. Having to do that in 48 hours can be a little bit tricky, especially if it's a topic you don't know. But if it's a topic that you should know a lot about, like, if this is a data science kind of job and they want you to present on, pros and cons of using Apache Spark or Cassandra or, some other kind of big data tool, um, then that should be part of your background already. And so giving a talk on it's really not like, it's easy to say it shouldn't be that hard, but that's not always going to be the case. And not everybody likes giving presentations, and public speaking is really tricky. But if that's part of the role, then that's something that you need to get used to. If it's a more senior level role, I would say it's probably something that you want to take very seriously, because as a senior level dev, you're going to be teaching things to other people around you. The entry level devs, the intermediate level devs, you're there as a senior level dev to kind of raise them up to where you are and teach them what you know. And so this might be like, hey, if we were to put you in charge of this, can you communicate that well to other people on the team? So it is a little bit unusual to have to give a presentation like that. Now, one company that I worked at, they actually told all applicants, hey, when you come in for, your several hours of on-site interviews, we want to start by having you give like a couple of minute presentation on just who you are, what's your background, where do you see yourself, what do you want to do in your career, and do that as a presentation in front of everybody who's going to be interviewing you that day. And it was a little bit nerve-wracking, but at the same time, if you think about it, the first several minutes of every conversation that you're about to have with all of those people that you're interviewing with for the rest of the day is always going to start out with like, hey, tell me a little bit about your background. And it's going to feel very repetitive for you to say this stuff over and over and over again. And so it was actually kind of a clever sort of move on the company's part to say like, hey, you know what, let's just put everybody together in one room. We'll have that person just start with, this is me, this is who I am. And then we'll like, everyone else will leave the room. They'll be in there with HR just to kind of give them like, okay, well, here's who you're meeting with and what time and blah, blah, blah. And just kind of, can we get you any water? Let me show you around, show you where the bathroom is, et cetera. And then we would actually start the interview process from there. And it was really interesting to see the different kinds of things that people would bring to these presentations. Some would talk about their background, some would talk about their families, some of them would give more information than I think they should have. But that's really on them, because we would always tell them like, hey, you're going to be part of a very small team. The company was only like 30, 40 people at the time. And, the idea was like, you're going to be working with a lot of people. We're going to want to know all about you. So win us over, tell us who you are. Tell us about like what drives you, what you're passionate about, and things like that. And so it was actually a pretty interesting sort of mechanism to alleviate the repetition, but it is a little bit daunting, I think, for people who aren't used to public speaking or don't like speaking in front of any size of group of people. But in an interview scenario, I would expect to talk to at least 1 to 2, 3, maybe 4 people at a time, in like panel type interviews. And so speaking in front of like 10 or 15 people, it's like, okay, well, it's just like a really big panel. We can kind of like do a little bit of Q&A, like, oh, tell me a little bit more about like that guitar lesson thing that you were talking about, or, whatever about their background that they think was important for us to know as a company. And then that way we all got kind of that same introduction, and we could kind of take it from there. But to go back and answer the question, like, hey, I wasn't given a lot of notice. You could always ask for more time. I mentioned that in another stream. I think you can get that in the I think it's the application playlist, or maybe the general playlist. But there's another one on there of like, how do I ask for more time to prepare? You can always ask for more time. Just say like, hey, you know what, 48 hours isn't very much time to like put together a whole technical presentation, to try to like teach a topic or present on a topic. Whether or not it's informal wear, per the question, I would say that's fine. Like, you're going to be wearing kind of business casual or business attire to the interview anyway, hopefully. I recommend that you do. So, having that followed by 60 minutes of Q&A, that just sounds like a typical sort of interview where, oh, I see on your resume that you know the following topics, so I'm just going to like hit you with a whole bunch of technical questions about that topic. So having, an hour of Q&A, I don't think is unreasonable either. It's unusual, but I don't think it's unreasonable. Um, I've had 3 interviews, a test assignment, and a soft offer. The hiring manager just viewed my LinkedIn profile. Why? Should I connect with them? I can't really answer the why. I mean, hopefully they looked at your LinkedIn profile long before that. If you've done a number of interviews and you've gotten all of that, and they've given you a soft offer, which is sometimes called a verbal offer, where they say, hey, we want to bring you on the team. We're going to give you X dollars. We're going to get like a whole thing kind of written up. But then you notice that they view your LinkedIn profile. That's fine. I mean, if they're making you an offer, they want to know all about you. But I mean, I would hope that from a manager point of view, that they looked at my LinkedIn profile way before they made me an offer. You know, I would hope that they would look at those kinds of things to know if they even want to interview me, much less hire me. To kind of see the background and see the things that I'm interested in, see the things that I'm passionate about, and see the kinds of topics that I post on LinkedIn, aside from like, hey, I got a live stream starting soon. Um, I would hope that they would be looking at my LinkedIn profile a lot sooner than that. But every company is a little bit different. Every manager is going to be a little bit different. Should you connect with them? I mean, if they've made you an offer, I mean, there's no harm in connecting with them, even if you turn down the offer, or if the negotiation on that offer doesn't work out, you could still connect with them. I mean, if you've impressed them enough that they've made you an offer, they like you. They like your background, they like your skill. So yeah, why wouldn't you connect? If that job doesn't work out, maybe they can introduce you to somebody else. Or if you don't want to take the job, maybe you can introduce somebody else to them. That's always a possibility. So yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with expanding your network, especially if you know that the company wanted to hire you in the first place. I was asked a question about a behavior question. And the behavior question is, what is your biggest regret and why? And someone was asking, like, how do you answer that question? What is your biggest regret? That's a bit of a tough one. You have to be careful to kind of stay out of the personal waters on that one. I think you want to be careful that you're not giving too much away about, personal details and things like that. Like, oh, my biggest regret is, I don't get back to Canada enough to see my family. It's like, okay, well, why is that like your biggest regret? And I think you have to be a little bit careful about exposing too much about your personal life in an interview. I mean, you do want to show that you're human and you're relatable and so on. but you do need to be a little bit careful about how much you share during an interview, especially personal details around family and so on. Um, so, what is your biggest regret? I think that that one's a little bit harder to answer. I think you could reframe it with like, what was the biggest, thing that I wish I had done differently on the job? Like I would maybe clarify with them and say, just out of curiosity, are you curious about something that happened on the job that I regret happened or didn't happen? Um, because what you regret might be framed very differently from what someone else might say. So you could talk about like, oh, I regret that I didn't push myself hard enough to get that promotion, or I regret that, my action or inaction on something caused this other thing. So I think you can be honest about how you answer that question, but I would always frame it on a professional level. Like, tell me something about your previous job that you regret happening. Maybe it was communication between teammates or something like that, or how you handled, like a lead scenario or a manager type of scenario where, you were in charge of other people and you didn't set a good example. I'm guilty of that. Um, and I've actually like sent out conversations to people, like apologizing to them, going, "Hey, you know what? When I was at that job, I wasn't a good example, and I apologize for that." And so I've been like trying to reach out to people from previous jobs as I learn things about myself and go, "Oh yeah, I shouldn't have done that. That was, something that I regret." It's not too late to make amends. Just reach out to people and talk to them about it. But how much of that do you want to talk about in an actual interview? Again, um, I think you need to be careful about that because they can bias against you. I mean, anything you say in an interview, they could use to bias against you, um, even if it's not um, like a legally protected kind of scenario. They could still just bias and go, "Nah, something was a little off. I'm not really sure about that person." It's really hard to prove prejudice and things like that. But I would always caution, don't say too much on a personal level that's gonna make you not get the job. Had another question come in that basically said, "How do you get hired as a web developer?" That one can be a little bit tricky if you've not had a job as a web developer. Like if this is something new that you want to get into, and I know a handful of people that hang out on the stream and have watched the stream in the past are fairly new in their career and fairly new at getting into web development of some kind or getting into just programming in general of some kind. And I first and foremost want to say I appreciate all of you hanging out on the stream and asking these questions. So, how do you get hired? That's a lot harder than how do you find a job. Um, if you find a job, you can apply, but how do you get hired? I mean, it's the whole process of you got to apply for the job, you got to do the interview and show them you can do the job, and hopefully you get the offer. I know it sounds a lot easier than it actually is in practice, but I mean, these are all the steps you have to take. You have to do your networking, your outreach, and you have to find companies that you're interested in. I actually just shared something on LinkedIn, I think just yesterday or maybe Friday, that I saw that I was basically saying, like, by the time you see the job post, it's too late to network. If you see a job post and then decide, like, oh, I'm going to reach out to someone at that company and try to make that connection and show them how awesome I am. Yeah, they've got 1,000 people applying for that job already. So the chances that you're going to stand out just by doing that networking and outreach is probably pretty small. And so I would always tell people, like, try to network sooner than later. Like, try to find companies that you're interested in, get your name out there, get introduced to them, be on their mind that when they are getting ready to post that job, they're like, you know what, we've been talking to that person already. Like, should we just reach out to them and see if they want the job? Like, that's the ideal scenario. They don't even have to post the job. They can just call you up and be like, hey, we got this job. Do you want it? That's the best kind of thing to do there. So B West, if that's the B West, I think it is up in the Washington area. Welcome. It's good to see you. If it's not Brandon, then that's okay too. I appreciate the follow either way. Hope you're doing well. Feel free, as always, to drop questions in chat. Happy to take questions as we go and answer those too. So I'm just going through a handful of questions, doing another Q&A session that I've done kind of similar in the past. And I was explaining earlier, I've got kind of this little Python script now that'll like chop the video up into pieces that I can post them all individually on YouTube and make little thumbnail images for it. I love automating that kind of stuff. So the next step on that, I think, is to actually automate uploading it to YouTube and like actually setting up the YouTube videos in a little more of the automated fashion. But we'll see. We'll see how that goes. But if that is Brandon, I hope you're doing well. Love to grab a coffee sometime. Actually, you owe me. If that is Brandon, you owe me a conversation for backing that book on Kickstarter back in the day. But that's another topic for another time. But either way, if that's not Brandon, I still wish you well. Hope you're doing good. Cool. What are some obvious things candidates forget to do before job interviews? I would say the number one thing is get some sleep. I think it's important to rest your brain before you go to an interview. By the time you walk into that interview, you know what you know, you don't know what you don't know, and it's okay. But if you stay up all night cramming, then your brain is going to be tired and you're going to have a lot harder time recalling that information. So there's lots of different chemicals in the brain that play into memory recall and things like that. And if you're tired and you haven't fueled your brain properly, you're just not going to be able to recall that stuff no matter what you want. So it's important, like, get a good night's rest before an interview. Like, go to bed extra early, get extra sleep. Like, set your alarm, but stay in bed that little bit extra. Don't get on a screen right away when you wake up. Have a good breakfast. Like, prepare yourself. Give yourself extra time to commute, whatever. Go to that interview. I would say that that's probably the number one thing that a lot of candidates forget to do. They like get to the interview and you see the bags under their eyes and they're like, is there any coffee around here that I can have? That's probably one of the worst scenarios to walk into an interview. So definitely get some sleep, get some rest. And I would say, like, start the studying earlier than later. And then, yeah, just give yourself a good rest leading up to the interview itself. Cool. That is Brandon. Good to see you, buddy. Hope you're doing well up there. Sorry I missed. I don't know whether you came to Denver with Jessica earlier this summer for that memorial, but sorry I missed out going. But yeah, hope you're doing well. So Brandon and I worked at SendGrid together, and it's always good to catch up and chat with folks. All right, let's see. What else have I got on the list? I'm just kind of going through a handful of questions that I've got. I've got them kind of laid out here, and probably go for another, I don't know, 15 minutes or so. But if you got other interview prep questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'll mix those in as well. I applied for 2 jobs, one great and one excellent. I got an offer for the great one and signed the paper, and then the excellent one called and wants to interview. What should I do? So this sounds very much like another one that I answered, I think, in the last stream, where someone said, I just started a job at a startup and Google called and they wanted like the final round interview at Google. What do I do? And my answer for this one's probably the same thing. If you've already signed that offer, you've kind of got that company excited that, yay, hiring is over, because it's a lengthy experience to hire somebody. It's an expensive experience to hire somebody. And if you've signed that offer, then they're starting to shut things down on their side, and they're starting to send out notices to everybody else saying, hey, thanks, but we filled the position. If you turn around and say, oh, JK, just kidding, I'm gonna like go take this other job instead, now they've got to, like, if they've already reached out to somebody saying, sorry, we filled the position, the company can't really go back to that person and say, oh, actually the position just reopened, so if you still want it, you can have it. Because then the person feels really kind of dejected at that point. It's like, now they know they came in second place, right? And it's not a great feeling to have as a human. So knowing that you weren't their number one pick, but I would say if you've already signed an offer and you still have these other interviews going, I have a couple of ideas on this one. I would say, first of all, I probably wouldn't have signed the offer. I would probably have held off signing the offer and let that company know, like, hey, you know what? I'm still finishing up the interview process with another company. I'd really like to respect that process if possible. So if I could have a small extension to sign this offer, I would appreciate it. On one hand, that can play to your advantage and also to a disadvantage. The disadvantage of it is the company's going to feel like, well, if you really wanted our job, like, why wouldn't you just take our offer? I've actually worked with someone who, I would kind of coordinate with them and say, hey, I want to hire this person, and I would extend the offer, and I would say, hey, you got a couple of days to think about it, let us know, and they would call them like later that day, going, what's your answer? If you really want the job, you'll just tell me yes while I get you on the phone. So what's it going to be? And I actually lost out on a lot of good candidates that way, and so I had to have a really hard conversation with them, saying like, knock that off. Like, we want to give them time to think about the offer, and if they're interviewing somewhere else, like, I get it. We like them, we want to hire them, but we're not the only game in town. We're not the only company trying to hire people, and so we need to be respectful of them and their time. And so, as a candidate, if you get an offer but you're still in an interview stage with someone else, you could ask for, a little bit of an extension. At the same time, you could push the other company and say, hey, I got an offer. I have an offer in hand. Offer in hand are the three magic words, offer in hand. Just basically say, like, could we speed this up? I'd really rather work for you. Is there anything that we can do to speed up this interview process? I'm going to try to ask them for an extension because I'd really rather work for you. So what can we do to like speed the timeline? That'll probably move mountains on their side to be like, oh, they really like us. Okay, well, let's see what we can do to get you in early for that interview, or maybe we can skip an interview thing because clearly someone's made you an offer. You are hireable and you are desirable as a person. So it can definitely speed things up on their side. Not always, but sometimes. But the question was, one great company and one excellent company. It kind of sounds like, okay, well, the great one wasn't your number one choice, but your number one choice later called and now they want to interview. That sounds like you haven't even started the interview process with them. So in that scenario, if I were to look at it very objectively as a candidate, I've applied at a couple of jobs. I get an offer from one and I never heard back from the other one. So I made it all the way through the interview process with company B, my second choice company, made it all the way through their process and got an offer. And I never even got into the interview with my first choice company A. I mean, at that point, you've committed then to take that offer for company B. I mean, you still applied there, you still took that job. So I would suggest like just take that job. Work at it for a little while. You can always tell the other company like, hey, you know what? I just started a job. I was waiting, never heard back from you, but that's okay. Let's see if we can, reschedule this for another time, or have something, like if it doesn't work out, or can I reapply in 6 months or 8 months or something along those lines. I think that you could definitely sort of pick that up and play that up a little bit. So yeah, I think you do need to be a little bit careful on some of that. You don't want to play it off like, I don't really care about your company, or I don't give, a rip about like who you are and what you do. I'm just going to like go do this other interview. But I think because you've signed the offer, you should probably commit to taking that job. Especially if you haven't yet started the interview process with the other one, and just count it as a loss, reapply back to them later on. This next question on the list is a little bit interesting. How do you answer a job interview question that are not entry level when your job experience is not in that field of work? And so you've applied for a job and you're new at that type of role, and you get asked questions that are not like entry level questions. So you're coming in as an entry level person and they're asking you questions that are like way harder, and they're absolutely not part of like an entry level type of question. That one could be leaning on armchair rest is not a good idea for the shoulder. That one's a little bit tricky. As an interviewer, it's my job and my responsibility to figure out what you know and what you don't know. And if I'm asking questions that are way outside of the scope of what you should know, part of it may be like, I've got to get through these questions so that we can, ascertain, like, do they know the following topics, because we need them for this role. And, this person knows this and this person knows that, but they don't know these other things. That may be like part of their scoring rubric, that they've got to ask that question. If they look at your resume and go, oh, you've never done data science before, just using that as an example, and you're applying for a data science role, they may still ask some questions just to see, like, what do you even know about the role? Like, why do you want to be a data scientist? Do you know about this? Do you know about that? Do you know about certain topics, or, common libraries or tools or databases or things that you would use in that role, just to see what your familiarity is in that role? But if they're asking like really deep, like how do you do, data modeling or whatever to optimize the machine learning performance on such and such, if that's like way more advanced than anything that you've studied for that kind of role, it's okay to say you don't know. Because again, my job as the interviewer is just figure out what you know and what you don't know. So it's okay to say you don't know, and then, maybe follow that with, what you guess or presume based on the question. Like you can make those kinds of things, sort of comments at that point. But it's, if it's like the whole interview feels like that, then that might be a bit of a flag that they know you don't have experience and they know you haven't used certain tools, but they keep asking you questions about those things. That just sounds like they're just trying to overwhelm you with that kind of stuff. And maybe you don't want to work there. So I would say anytime you're in an interview scenario and you don't know an answer to a question, that's totally all right. You can just say, I don't know, and move on. Move on to the next question or move on to the next topic. As an interviewer, I'm going to keep kind of poking and prodding at your knowledge to figure out what you know and what you don't know. And sometimes I may ask a couple of additional questions just to see if it sort of jogs your memory. But, hopefully they're not doing that too much. Otherwise, it's a very awkward interview scenario. All right. I think I'm going to wrap up there. I got a handful of other questions that I think I might save for another Q&A. Let's see, just looking down the list, see if there's anything else I want to grab here. And can I give an example of a type of job or career where interview preparation is not that important? No. I think interview preparation is important no matter what kind of job you're going to. You should be ready to answer questions. You should have practiced common questions that you're going to get asked and practice the answers that you want to give. Listen to your answers, write out your answers. Not that it sounds like I am reading a script of an answer. You want to make it feel conversational, but you want to be prepared. You have to have good answers to their questions or they're not going to consider you as a candidate. They're looking for people that are standing out, people that they're going to, remember and be memorable. They don't want someone who's just bland, I think, for lack of better word. They want to make sure that, the person that they're hiring is excited. And so you have to know what the company does. You have to know maybe who their clients are. You have to know what their business model is, depending on the kind of role that you're getting into. If you're getting into like a customer facing role, whether it's like a customer success or like a developer relations role, or, things along those lines, you need to be prepared. You have to know what kinds of questions you're going to be asked. You can't wing it. And again, that kind of goes back to the conversation I had with Lee last week or the week before. I forget. Time's kind of slipping away from me these days. But when I had Lee on the stream, I think it was last Sunday, he was talking a lot about like, you have to be prepared for these things. You can't just show up and expect to sort of ad-lib your way through it. Cool. All right. Well, I think we'll wrap up there. I think that would be a good place to kind of stop. Like I said, I've got lots of other questions, but I'm going to go through and I'm going to like trim this up into like the smaller individual videos and get those published out on the playlists as well on YouTube. So give it a like, give it a subscribe. Oh, now we got a question. What's up, Silver? Good to see you again. Silver says in chat, this might be out of scope for the type of questions you're answering. I'm still going to ask. That's great. I love taking conversation in chat here. I've been part of the interview process for the current company where I work. I've gotten to do the culture interview. My question is, do you have any suggestions or questions to ask a higher level engineer, like staff level senior engineer, as a junior dev? In the past, I've asked questions like, oh, kind of late, sorry. No, go ahead and ask, it's fine. I would say to start out with, if you're interviewing somebody above your level, and I've actually been in this position myself when I was at SendGrid, I was actually interviewing our next VP of engineering, which was weird. And honestly, I would ask them a lot of questions about what their leadership style was And I would also give them a technical challenge, because it's really hard to follow a leader who doesn't have any sort of technical ability or problem solving kind of skill. And so we would ask them some of the same problem solving types of problems that we were asking the engineers that we were interviewing at the time. If you're interviewing somebody who's going to be in a position over you, it's important to ask them, like, how do you kind of level up people around you? What's your process for mentorship? How are you going to mentor me where I don't have as much knowledge as you? I don't have as much experience as you. How are you going to teach me what you know? What's your process been like at other jobs? And kind of hear their history. Don't let them get away with vague, like, oh yeah, we'd sit down, we just, we'd pair. It's like, well, what did that look like? Like, how did you know that that was successful? How do you know that they were getting that information correctly? You would want to find out, like, what's your preference for doing a code review? If I put a pull request on GitHub and I ask you for a code review, what could I expect that code review to look like? For preparation for something like that, it might actually be a good idea just to write some dummy code, put a pull request on that dummy code, and ask them to give you a code review. And just say, hey, you know what? We're going to take like 10 minutes. I want you to look through this code. It's just like some little CRUD application in Rails or something. Could you just look this over and give me some thoughts on how you would do this as a real code review for someone who's junior? How would you help them optimize their code, or what kinds of questions would you ask about this thing? That could be something where you even like give that code to them ahead of time, so that they can kind of prepare. So when they come to the interview, it's more conversational. It's not in the moment of like, I got to like read through and kind of see what's interacting with what. It might be a little bit trickier, but if you can give them a code ahead of time and then during the interview say, all right, I've made a pull request. Let's go through and show me how you do a code review. Or imagine that we're at my desk right now and you're going to walk me through a code review of like what I could have done better. I think that can be really telling for a senior level dev, as far as like team collaboration and conversation, their communication style, how effective they are about like trying to tell you like what's important to them as a developer, or in that staff, architect, principal kind of role. I think that can be really telling. And then for you, in your mind, you're going to be asking yourself all the time, like, would I want to work with this person if they're going to do this all the time? And if you start getting any sort of negative vibes, you need to be like jotting that stuff down and writing that stuff out so that you can give your team that feedback later on. I've asked questions like, what makes a staff engineer? Or at what point in time did you consider yourself a staff engineer, architect, or whatever role they've applied for? Those are interesting questions too. I think, what makes a staff engineer? What makes a principal, or, so on. That varies a lot from company to company. So it might be a little tricky to get like an apples to apples kind of comparison in answers if you're interviewing lots of different people for that role and trying to gauge, well, I like that person's answer better than that person's answer for like what a senior level dev should be, or what a staff engineer should be, or whatnot. I think you're going to get a pretty wide variety of answers from those. So it might be a little bit hard to do like a direct one-to-one comparison on those kinds of answers. I like the one, at what point in time did you consider yourself a senior dev, or, a principal or staff, or like, chief architect, or whatever title you want to give it. They've been around the block for a while. Like, when did you consider yourself at that level? For me, if I had to answer that kind of question, when did I consider myself like a senior level dev? I would say it was many years into my career where I started working with other people who didn't know what I knew, and I had to sort of mentor them and help make them better, and take on more responsibility as far as like leading the team and leading the direction of a team, and having more input into what it was we were doing, and not just being the person being directed to go do the work, to say, all right, Ian, it's your job to go work on the following things. If they were saying, hey, Ian, how should we build such and such? That's when I knew that I was in a place where they trusted me to work at that level. So, I mean, that's how I would answer a question like that. I would go into a little more detail, a little more specific detail on some things, but that would be the kind of answer I would give for something like that. But I think that that's a really good one to ask for sure. Like, when did you consider yourself ready for that kind of role? It kind of goes back to a question that I think I answered on the last stream of like, what was the question? It was worded like, how do you, oh, now I want to go back and find it. It was along the lines of, does a previous title play into somebody's application? Like, let's say I was applying for a staff engineer role. Would they look at my application and go, well, you've never been a staff engineer, so, are we going to even consider interviewing you for a staff engineer role? Well, it really depends on their criteria of what a staff engineer would be. And they would look through my history, and they would look through the kinds of jobs that I had, and maybe some of the other titles that I've had, because, I've never had a staff engineer title, but I've had a lot of roles that could play out as a staff engineer depending on their definition of staff engineer. So it really depends on the company, I think, a little bit to some degree, where they would look at that criteria and they would look over my history and at least do a phone call and go, yeah, I think this person could be, could have the experience for that kind of role. They've never had that role officially as a title, but let's get them in the interview. Let's see. And so it does sound a little bit similar to that kind of question. So hopefully that helps you out there, Silver. But it's cool that you're getting involved in the interview process. That's great. Definitely want to look into like some interview training if possible, and try to get questions from other people on the team. Like, hey, if I were interviewing a senior level dev or, this or that, like what kinds of questions would you ask if you were in my position or at my level back as like entry level dev or intermediate level dev? Like, what would you be asking these people? I think that it would show a little bit of vulnerability on your part, but I think that it's going to help you kind of shape what kinds of questions to ask, but then also get them to help you determine like what makes a good answer to that question. Because just knowing, oh, go ask this question, doesn't mean a thing if they don't tell you, like, yeah, if they say this, they're off their rocker, like they don't know what they're talking about. But if they answer this way or that way, or they explain such and such, then yeah, they really do know what they're talking about, and they would be a good person to hire. So make sure that they're also helping you with how to sort of grade and score the questions. Sometimes one thing that I've done with more entry-level people is I would actually shadow them on an interview. And I would tell the candidate, like, hey, they're going to interview you. I'm just here to listen and make sure that everything's going well. I'm not actually going to ask you any questions, and I'm not going to interject. I'm just here to make sure that they're asking good questions and to help them sort of score answers and things like that. And I think most candidates are okay with knowing that that's happening, because they know then that, there's at least a second person in the room that's like tracking things and knowing whether things are going well or not. Cool. All right, well, I'm going to wrap up there, and I'll get this video sliced and diced and get it all up on YouTube a little bit later this evening. Have a great week. If there is stuff coming up with Job Hunt, if you've got Job Hunt going on, definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to help people out, make connections, make introductions, all that kind of stuff. Just reach out. All my contact info is on techinterview.guide as a website, and we'll catch you on Thursday. Have a good night, everyone. Cheers.